Okay, I think we're 10 seconds past 12, so we'll try and get going on time as the audience starts filtering in. I will start. The recording is on. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. We are very much looking forward to this one. I hope you as an audience are too. Today's webinar is titled Clean Data, Smarter AI, Lower Costs. And that's preparing Microsoft 365 for Copilot by cleaning up the information estate. I'm delighted to welcome with me today from Cloud Essentials, we've got Rocher Wieman, Modern Work and Content Management Lead. And we've also got from our close partners at AvePoint, Solution Engineer, James McCann. So welcome both. Looking forward to what you've got lined up for us today. And we'll bring you both, Rocher and James, in as we go along. But before we dive into it, I want to give a quick reminder to some of you who might be new to us today, who we are at Cloud Essentials. We are a long-standing and dedicated Microsoft 365 partner. We specialize in the area of enterprise information management and being a trusted advisor to Microsoft-centric customers. So we help customers mature their content and information management across the M365 and Azure ecosystem. Things like security, compliance, foundations, data governance, content lifecycle, migration and consolidation. And then the day-to-day disciplines like e-discovery, records management, and external sharing controls. Now, what's changed is AI. Copilot and agents have made information quality, permissions, and governance business critical almost overnight. Because AI will, happily, and we'll talk about this as we go along, but it'll happily surface whatever you've left lying around. So a lot of the work now sits at that intersection. A lot of our work sits at that intersection. So getting the estate genuinely ready for Copilot and securing, data for AI agents. And that's also why we've built some of our 60-day activation sprints that you can see as part of our offerings. These are focused, time-boxed engagements that take you from a Copilot maturity assessment through to real deployment. So, search and agent optimization, data security, and the change management and training that makes adoption stick. Rather than a 12-month program, it's 60 days to measurable progress. So as we go through today's 4 questions that I'll come to in a second, this is the lens that we'll bring from Cloud Essentials. As part of today's webinar, we do want to try and keep it interactive where we can. So we will be posing a couple of questions along the way. And for that, we'll use the Slido technology. So if you can get your smartphones out ready, you can scan that QR code on the screen right now, and we'll put some more up as we come up with those questions along the way. And that brings us to today's topic. Here's how we'll spend our time together today. 4 questions, all pointing at one goal, which is a cleaner, AI-ready information estate. So first, what's changed? As I mentioned, AI has raised the bar on information quality, governance, and storage. Things you could live with a few years ago now show up in a Copilot answer. So we've got to be aware of that. Second, what's hiding in your Microsoft 365 environment? This is the honest look, the content sprawl, the over-permissioned sites, the lifecycle gaps that quietly undermine Copilot as well. And then third, what should actually happen to all that information? How you decide what to keep, archive, remediate, or dispose of, and how you can make that a repeatable decision rather than a one-off cleanup. And then fourth, how do we make it real? So that's where, us at Cloud Essential comes in. It's the controls, the tooling, and the practical approach to get you there as well. I will just mention, if you do have any questions as we go along, if you could just place those in the chat and we'll cover them if we have some time at the end. We are quite tight on the hour. We'll keep an eye on the time. So if we don't have the time to cover those questions, we'll definitely get back to you with some answers at another time as well. With that, I'm going to hand you over to Rocher Wieman to cover in more detail as to why this matters now. So Rocher, over to you.
Perfect. Thanks for the introduction, Gethin. So I'll jump straight into it. I think the important part that we need to think about at the moment is whether the current choice or the reason why we are doing is a strategic choice, or is it a point where we've gotten into a reactive choice where it's already become a problem for us and we need to jump to resolve this issue. So none of the issues that we are going to discuss today are particularly new. The difference is that the consequences of ignoring them have changed substantially. So What we need to remember is that Microsoft Teams, SharePoint, and OneDrive have become like the default locations where organizations collaborate and create information. So naturally, what that means at the end of the day is that you've got more content, more sites, you're sharing with a lot of more people, and you've got a lot of versions in your content state. So over time, this creates a storage pressure. Large files, your historical versions, and inactive sites begin translating directly into an additional cost. But now we're introducing a new factor. Everybody is becoming aware of AI. So Copilot and agents now depend on what information a user is able to access within your organization. So organization need the confidence not only that permissions are appropriate, but also that sensitive information has been identified and governed correctly. That's where data governance and sensitivity labeling become important. So from permissions perspective, the question should be who can get to this? And then from a sensitivity and classification, we should ask ourselves what information, what it is, how sensitive it is, and how should it be handled. So you really need both. And that's why I typically say that AI is changing old storage problems into information quality and a governance problem. We're just not seeing it because it's hidden at the back end. Okay, so next slide. Before AI, we did tolerate a lot of these things. We just let it slide. We had the rising costs. Search wasn't always great, so we didn't get the information. It didn't pop up in our search, so it was okay for us to have 3 or 4 copies of a document. We would just use the one that we find. All project stuff were just left behind, so that meant that the permissions accumulated, and then those were recognized as problems, but they weren't urgent to fix. But now with AI, all of that is changing. So now the wrong version is so much easier to find. Old information can still influence what users retrieve, and oversharing then becomes much more visible because AI can discover items a lot easier. So there's an important distinction here that we have to remember, and that is that Copilot isn't bypassing your security model. It works with the access that a user already has within your environment. So the issue is whether the access is still appropriate. And access is only one part of governance. We also need to understand whether sensitive content has been properly classified and labeled at the back end. So for example, if a document has highly confidential information, we should not purely rely on somebody remembering to save that item into the right site with the right permissions or a folder that is locked down within that site. This is where sensitivity labels gives us a persistent way of identifying and protecting that information. So the real question becomes, are our permissions, classification and governance controls actually reflecting the sensitivity and business value of the information that we've got in our environment? Copilot doesn't create that problem, but it does expose it within your content estate. Okay, so when we assess Microsoft 365 environments, there are a few patterns that we see repeatedly. First of all, it's too much content. So information, it's easy to leave information active for longer periods after they've stopped being used. Like for instance, if a project has ended, that is still an active workspace. So that means it just lies there dormant. Users will leave the company, and that means it could be an orphaned workspace as well. So you just lose traction of what's happening with those workspaces. There are also too many versions. So this can be a significant driver for your storage being or shooting through the skies, particularly for large documents like CAD files, media files, and project content. What we also see is that users have far too much access. So that means permissions has accumulated over the years. People join teams, projects change eventually, people move between departments, and they create a lot of sharing links within the content. And that means those links stay there if the proper guardrails aren't in place. So unless the permissions are periodically reviewed, someone's access today might look extremely different from what the organization intended 5 years ago. But the answer isn't simply to clean permissions. We also need data governance around the content itself. So if a document contains sensitive commercial, personal, legal, or confidential information, sensitivity labels gives us a way to classify the information and apply appropriate protection. So permissions will govern your access. So that means whatever you have permissions to will come through from a Copilot perspective, but sensitivity labels will help you govern the information. So it's just an additional layer on top of your permissions to ensure that people don't get access to the wrong content. So another one we also find is ownership. Like I mentioned previously, many sites survive after owners have left the companies and those projects never close. So that means that workspace just remains open. And most importantly, we find too little life cycle. So nobody is comfortable with making this decision, but we all need to think about what we want to keep, what we want to archive, what can be disposed of, and what should be remediated. And if I talk about remediation, I'm talking about permissions, sharing, all of that stuff. And that's why storage optimization cannot really be separated from governance, retention, sensitivity, and when you're looking at your AI readiness. So we're going to jump into the first poll. I might have been a bit too quick with the scan in the first one, so I'm going to give you a couple of seconds to scan for the first question. But yeah, what we would like to understand is what is currently driving this topic for you, because interestingly, organizations often arrive at the same problem, but from very different directions. Okay, so I'm just going to jump to answers so we can see them on the screen. And I'll give you a couple of seconds to vote. Okay, perfect. So far, what I am seeing is that it's sort of a split between rapid SharePoint storage growth, AI readiness, and then compliance and security concerns. So it looks like rapid growth is winning the race now. But anyway, so if storage growth is your primary pressure, it may initially look like a capacity problem. If it's Copilot readiness, then we might have to look at a AI readiness project. If it's compliance or security that's driving it, you may have to look at a governance program, but quite often when we investigate, we discover the same underlying problems, and that's unmanaged lifecycle, unclear ownership on the content, inappropriate access, inconsistent classification, and content that's just sitting in the wrong place for far too long. So I'm going to move on. Okay, so if we removed technology terminology from the discussion, there are 3 business outcomes at stake. So the first one is trust, and there you have to ask yourself the question, can users trust what AI finds? If 3 versions of the same policy exists within your environment, how do you decide which one is the authoritative one? And then also, if all documents are still accessible, AI cannot automatically make that decision for you. So it won't tell you that, listen, I found these 3 documents, but this one is the latest one, so I think you should focus on that one. What it finds, it's going to present to you, and that's where you might get some hallucinations. So then we've got the risk. From a risk perspective, we need to ask the question, should the users be able to access everything that they currently have access to? Again, it's not Copilot that's causing this issue. It's not bypassing your permissions. It's just the accumulation of the permissions over the period that you have been using SharePoint as your document repository. And governance needs to go further than access. We also need to identify which information requires stronger protection, because you might have permissions in place from a project perspective, but it needs additional work for us to protect more information. So that's where your sensitivity label will become very powerful. So a highly confidential document should carry that classification with it, rather than solely relying on where somebody stored it or whether it has been secured. So the model then becomes the right person has the right access, and the content is appropriately classified. Then the last item is cost. So from that, it is a commercial question. Are we paying for SharePoint storage prices just to keep information actively available that is not being collaborated on anymore? And then the important point there is that these aren't three independent problems. The same information estate affects AI quality, your governance risk, and your storage cost. So next slide. Okay, so this distinction is becoming increasingly important. It is extremely easy for an organization to become AI enabled. All you have to do is you have to assign license, select the pilot group that you're going to roll it out to, and plan your training. And then technically that means you're ready. But that doesn't necessarily mean the information estate is ready. AI readiness means something completely different, because we have to ask ourselves the questions: have we assessed the content? Do we understand where the sensitive information is sitting? Are our permissions appropriate? Is there a document lifecycle in place? And that's the difference. Licensing readiness is very visible, but information readiness is much harder to identify because it's hidden at the back end. And information readiness is ultimately determines the quality and safety and the trustworthiness of the AI at the end of the day. So we've simplified the approach into 3 stages. The first stage is know it. So that is understanding what you've actually got within your environment, and that's your storage or activity, what versions you've got, what your version settings are, if that's affecting your storage at all, what's your sharing ownership, and what's the risk attached to your data. And importantly, what sensitive information do we have and where it is. This is where classification, sensitivity labeling, and data governance insight become part of the picture. You can't govern information if you don't know what you are governing. Then the second part of it is decided. We then decide what happens with the content. Should it remain active? Do we need to archive it? Can we dispose of it? Or does it require any remediation? And when I'm talking about remediation, I'm talking about fixing permissions, assigning an owner to content that has been orphaned, applying the correct sensitivity labels to the content, correcting your retention, or moving the information into an appropriate location, like a different storage location. We don't need it in the SharePoint active storage if it's not being used at the moment. And then finally, how do we stop this exact same mess from returning in future? And that's where we bring all of this together. We bring in your retention, lifecycle, sensitivity and classification, access governance, archiving, and then continuous monitoring. So if there's anything that you take away from today's session, it's just know it, decide it, and control it. Okay, so when organizations typically see a huge number of storage within their SharePoint environment, the question they naturally ask is, what is taking up all of this space? But it's rarely one culprit. It's normally years of accumulated behavior. So what we found in previous engagements are that versions are a problem. So some companies have very large files. They left their versioning on the default settings, which means that they've accumulated a large repository of versions at the back end of a file. We've also identified a lot of redundant, obsolete, and trivial information. Again, large files like CAD, media, video, or engineering files, depending on which industry you're working in. And then a major one is your retention uncertainty. A lot of us just switched on retention because we just wanted to make sure that the content doesn't get disposed of accidentally, but you have to be confident whether this is something that either has to be legally kept or if it can be operationally deleted. And that's when the question or the safest response was just at that stage to keep it because we don't want to get rid of it. And then 10 years from now, because we decided we're going to keep it, that becomes very expensive for us. Then inactive sites, that's typically just when a project ends, but those workspaces still remain active within the SharePoint environment. And then no active closure process. So when a project closes operationally, nobody closes it from an information governance perspective. So that means your permissions remain, your sharing remains, and the content remains. And sometimes sensitive content remains accessible far longer than intended. So that's why it's a good project or a matter closure project that needs to be in place in order for us to not just save storage, but look at your access, look at your sensitivity, retention, ownership, and the life cycle at the end of the day. Okay, so then we're going to jump into the second poll. If you have lost that link, I'm going to give you 5 seconds to scan again. But yeah, we also want to understand how far along you are in your storage journey. So let's see what people say. Okay, so I see it as a split between yes and not yet and no. But I mean, yeah, if your answer is yes, what that just tells us is that a lot of you have this operational cost that you need to keep in mind. And at this stage, buying storage it's not a wrong thing to do, but the important question is, are we buying the storage for active business information, or are we buying storage because the lifecycle decisions haven't been made yet? And then from getting close perspective, this is actually the perfect time for you to start assessing your estate before simply just increasing the capacity, and then understand why this growth is happening within your environment. Okay, so I'm going to move on. So for us, the answer isn't always to delete everything. And equally, it also isn't just to archive everything. So every body of information needs to consider 4 specific outcomes. The first outcome would be to keep, and the questions there are just whether it's a still active, current, or trusted information, then we'll keep that information. Archive is it still business relevant? Are there any regulatory or contractual reasons for us to still keep it? And then that means we can just archive it. We don't need to one click away, but we can just retrieve it from a different solution and then get that item available. Then the question is disposing of it. Has the information reached the end of its legal or regulatory and business value? And if the policy then permits it, can we then defensively delete the content out of the environment? And then also remediation. This is very important. Sometimes the problem isn't the existence of the content. It's the fact that the content has stayed, but there's something wrong with that content. And then we need to look at your permissions, which owners are attached to the content, if they've got proper labels, and also whether the information lifecycle controls are correct on the content. So it's not how many terabytes can we get rid of. What we start with is what should happen to this information. Okay, then what I'm going to chat to you about is a couple of tools that are available for you to start looking at this. So once we understand what the lifecycle decision is, then we can start applying the technology. So the first one, if you've got SharePoint Premium licensing, you can use SharePoint Advanced Management, and this will help you gain visibility into areas such as oversharing, inactive sites, ownership, access, and your site lifecycle. The second tool you can use, so Purview will give you a broader data governance layer. This is where we bring in your sensitivity labels, what retention policies you've enabled at the back end, what's your data loss prevention, records management, audit, and your data security capabilities around AI. And sensitivity labels are definitely important at this part. A permission says that Riche can open this file, but a sensitivity label helps say that the file is confidential and should continue to be treated accordingly. So those are the different controls, and mature governance needs both. And then the third part is Cloud Essentials and AvePoint, where we connect everything that was done with those two tools into a governance model for execution. And that's where we use the information for assessments, reporting, helping you define what your lifecycle decisions are going to look like, and then your archiving execution. But after that, even with all of that in place, it is the ongoing governance that is important. And at this point, this is where the tooling becomes valuable, because the tool doesn't make the decision of what your business should keep, because the decisions are defined and technology is allowing us to implement them consistently at scale. And I think at this point, this is where I'm going to take a bit of a breather. I'm going to hand over to James, and he'll take you through some of the AvePoint stuff.
Yeah, okay, great. Yeah, so my name is James McCann. So I'm a solutions engineer here at AvePoint. I've been in the data security and information management and governance space for the past 16 years. And we helping organizations with storage optimization conversations throughout that time. Okay, so first of all, I want to tell a story around a real life story that happened, and it caused a lot of Copilot confusion. So in this example, common problem is that if you don't clean up and cleanse your data, if you have legacy information that is sitting around from 2012 or even from the early 2020s that either should have been deleted or should have been archived, that data will still be surfaced in results by Copilot if appropriate. So in this example, if you wanted to perform a search, Copilot will analyze all the data that it has access to. If you're using a lot of legacy information, you can expect lower quality results. You're not working off the latest and greatest data. You're working across outdated information, sometimes information which is irrelevant, and that can spring up and appear in results as part of the analysis that's done by Copilot. One example of this was there was an organization, and they wanted to they had an employee, and they wanted to perform a search and to develop a sales strategy for the year. So naturally went to Copilot, asked Copilot the question. Copilot then went off and used all of the information which it has access to, whether that is the legacy information, for example, or even the most recent. And the result was there was an unexpected document that was returned in the results. So this was a workforce reduction document that appeared within the results of this question, which was supposed to be about the sales strategy for the year ahead. Now, naturally, this was not a document which was expected to be seen for this type of search. This did cause mass panic as a result. So naturally, the employee said, look what I found, went and told their friends at the organization. And once this type of news breaks, it does break very quickly as well. So there was mass confusion, there was mass anxiety about these potential layoffs that were upcoming as part of the company's strategy. And of course, this type of information does spread very fast, of course, as well. So within a few moments, of course, this did lead to organizational panic and real confusion at the leadership level, but also at the organizational level as well, as a part of the results from Copilot. Now, it turned out that the file that was exposed, or the file that was returned in the results, was actually a legacy or an obsolete file. So this was actually a file from 2012. It was a reduction plan back in 2012, but that should not have been surfaced within the results. This is an example of a file which should have either been archived or deleted, depending on the appetite for the organization. And again, this is all around cleansing your data foundation, both from a storage optimization perspective, but also from a data quality perspective as well, because if you improve the foundation, you can expect better results from AI, from Copilot. Now, we would treat objects in a similar fashion. So whether it is data, which is the conversation for the most part today, or whether it is at the workspace level, or even at the guest user level, or at the AI agents or apps level in Power Platform, we would take an inventory. So this is the AvePoint approach. We would take an inventory of those objects. We would catalog those. We would have that inventory, and then we would govern the objects. So we would determine whether we want to archive or defensively delete in some cases, and we would have this continual approach. So it's not a once and done. This is an approach which is performed on an iterative basis. So whether that's done by a cleanup that's done periodically with your data, or whether it is done with attestations for those other types of objects, which I mentioned on a regular basis with the data owners. The approach is similar to do that. What I'm going to run into now is a quick demonstration. So I'm going to move over. I'm going to share my screen, and please let me know when you can see.
Yeah, all good here, James.
Okay, great. So just a quick demonstration of the solution itself. So as part of the analysis for M365, we can go off and scan and analyze your SharePoint sites, your teams, your groups, and also OneDrive locations. So if they're attached to a site collection, we will go off and analyze that data. And we're going to look for a number of different things here. We're going to look for redundant, obsolete, and trivial data, and we'll talk through what each of those are in a moment. At a high level, you will understand how much data you have. What is the oldest files that have been found? How old are they? What is the breakdown of versions that have been found within the analysis as well? So typically we do see versions as a challenge. That is a challenge for many organizations. The amount of versions which can be found can be high. So tackling the versions is going to be one part of this solution, which of course we can help with as part of the analysis. The other side is what information has been duplicated as well. So we will have a breakdown of the duplicated data as well, and again that can help to reduce your storage. Now, as part of this, we will also look for our categories of redundant, obsolete, and trivial data. These can be tailored as required. We can also look for the types of information, but also overlay the modified time range as well. So perhaps you want to look for information which is older than 12 months in terms of the last modified date. So we can see here that 66% of the data is actually rot information, which has not been modified within 12 months. If we wanted to change that to 2 years, we can actually see that this still 59% of data has not been modified in 2 years, and it is also rot information. So worth noting, typically what we see for analysis, or that a conservative estimate would be 50% of your data would be redundant, obsolete, and trivial. We have seen this northwards of 70% on many assessments that have been done as well, particularly if there's never been any cleanup that's been performed as a result, or even for some of those more risk-adverse industries as well that do like to retain information for a long period of time. Now, in terms of the types of information which we can look for, so we can, in terms of your redundant data, we can look for legacy versions that you want to retain. Perhaps you want to look for any file which has more than 5 versions. Let's go off and delete any of the versions which are above 5. We'll retain the most recent 5 though. Or you could also look for, you know, the most recent 10. Typically, those are the ranges which we would recommend. That'll clean up a lot of storage, but also give you flexibility between your versions, because typically you don't need to revert much back further than that amount of versions due to the data loss perspective. This will also look for duplicated data as well. So if you've got duplicates, we can also target those as well and clean those up. Your obsolete data, this can look for, you know, legacy Office files which haven't been modified in a certain period of time. We can look for, you know, legacy notes. So this could be your PDFs or your notes, for example. The legacy videos, pictures, and zip files, or a common issue which we see for many organizations, that these contain a lot of storage. These can be sitting in SharePoint. They can be you know, sitting on premium storage, which they do not require to be on. So this can also be some of the hotspot areas which we typically see for clients as part of the assessments. Anything else, any other types of files, we would also add them to a bucket, and we can, you know, change around the configuration as required and tailor that for each business. Trivial information, you can think about this as data which does not have business value. So this is a small data set that I'm using on a demo environment, but trivial information can account for files which are sitting in custom folders. It can be cached and recycled files. It can be files without extensions. These do not add business value. Typically, they can be deleted outright, or of course, you do have the option to archive those as the alternative as well. Now, the types of files which have been found will also be presented here. Occasionally, you will see that there is some outliers of files which you either do not want to have on M365 storage at all, or potentially there's some outliers of niche file types which you are not aware of that you want to optimize as well. So that is on the analysis piece. Now, as part of this, there's the initial analysis which is done. Then there's the optimization approach. So that is, of course, to target the relevant areas which you want to take action on. And then you can either archive or you can defensively dispose, depending on your choice on that occasion. So you can use our storage or your own storage in terms of the archival purpose as well. Now, importantly, once information is archived, we can also rehydrate files if required, and we can provide that flexibility to end users with a stub in the source location. So I'll show you what that looks like. This is a SharePoint site. It's got 3 files here which have been archived as part of the storage optimization process. So this process is a multi-staged process which we've used here. So we have decided to archive files for a certain period of time. We can say archive files for 3 years, for example. We can look for, then decide to keep them in the archive location for a set period of time before then going off and deleting them again. So this would be a 2-stage process, if you like. It can be archive, and then we will keep the data in the archive for a set period of time before deleting. So again, we can help you to manage the life cycle even for those archived files as well. Now, if an end user wanted to restore a file, they've got a restore link. We call this a stub that sits in the original source location. So if they did want to bring this file back within a few clicks, they can restore this to the original location. That will then take a moment to run. So that can typically be done within 30 seconds on most occasions. And then the end user will have the original file back in the source location if they do need to review that. Perhaps they wanted to perform a quick review. Maybe they wanted to leverage some insights from Copilot potentially on the restored file for that short period of time. The important thing here is that we can also hide any of, and we can tailor any of the buttons here, so we can turn off the download option, for example. But that process will allow the flexibility for end users to either restore from the source location itself, from a stub location, or indeed we also have a search portal which will allow to search across archived content as well, including its contents itself. That is the quick demonstration. We can see here that's 50% complete. That'll just take a moment to restore back to the original location, but that is the quick demonstration which I wanted to share on this occasion. The file is now back in the source location as well, as we've seen.
Great stuff. Thanks, James. That's a great overview, I think, on what it looks like from a practical and functionality perspective. I think what would be good now, and I think what we've prepared is some real world stories. Roche, this is obviously sector agnostic. Anyone can run into these pain points that have been highlighted today, but I know you and James have pulled together some real world examples from some specific sectors, but I know the audience come from a variety of sectors, and I'm sure that they'll identify to some of these pain points that you highlight, but I'll pass it back to you guys.
Perfect. Yeah. Thanks, James. Thanks, Gethin. So I'm going to jump straight into that. So we've now seen how the technology can help us identify and act on these specific issues. What we need to do next now is bring this back into the real world. So like Gethin has explained, we chose 3 scenarios. It's 3 completely different industries: engineering, legal, and retail. But on the surface, the information architecture just looks completely different. So from an engineering perspective, the challenge is often that the project-based information contains very large files, like technical drawings or CAD drawings. Because they're very important, the content needs to be retained for longer periods, because if you build a bridge, we can't get rid of the plans for that bridge within 5 years. That bridge needs to last for 50 plus years. So if something happens, the content needs to be readily available. And then also completed projects remain active, and with the size of CAD drawings, it has a significant strain on the storage consumption at the back end. Then we've got the legal industry. So the challenge is that they've got matter-based content, but it's also sensitive and privileged client information that requires confidentiality and retention to be set up. We've also found that they have duplicated information, because we want to segregate your matter workspace from an external sharing workspace. The content is duplicated between the two, but when we're done with the sharing, we don't bring the information back into the matter workspace. So it creates that disconnect and duplication of data. And with them also closed matters that continue to consume your active storage. And then also another example is in the retail industry, where you tend to get a different type of storage sprawl. So for them, it's product and marketing content. It's also got large media and digital assets. And then the information is across multiple brands and teams. So seasonal content is rarely reviewed in this example. And then duplicate files also accumulate over time. But beneath all of that, the patterns are remarkably similar. The content is created for a legitimate business purpose. The purpose is eventually ending, and the information then just remains exactly where it was, active, accessible, and consuming your storage. The governance questions are also the same. Does the information still have business value? Does it need to remain active? How sensitive is the information? And then we need to ask the question, should we keep it, archive it, remediate it, or dispose of it? So whether you've got projects, matters, or product campaigns, the underlying lifecycle challenge doesn't really change. So the business context changes, but the lifecycle problem does not. And yeah, the next three examples will just take you through three practical examples of how this was applied and how we fix the problem for these clients.
Okay, yeah, so this is one, this is a case study from the AvePoint side. So this was a retail client. They had a challenge with their storage. Of course, they had seen huge growth for their M365 storage. So it had grown from 600 terabytes to 1.1 petabytes, and it was costing them over £1 million within additional SharePoint storage. This was a huge data growth. So there was 50 terabytes of data growth per month. That would then make it exceed by 2.3 petabytes by 2026 if that had continued to run on, but also incurring that £1 million plus annual overage fee as well. So huge data growth, huge costs for the organization, and they really did need to tackle this. They needed to reduce the amount of data. They needed to optimize their storage, and this was really helping them to move towards AI-driven tools as well. So AvePoint Opus was used to analyze the content, but also to optimize the storage. So this was the case of minimizing versions. It was also archiving data to Azure, and also ensuring that the information was backed up as well. So that was also part of the conversation, but specifically for the storage optimization piece, this was really around tackling this huge storage issue and the rapid growth which they had for the business. This helped them to avoid an additional 1.5 million in additional storage costs, and again did help them to optimize their licenses as well. So again, huge business case for the organization to get this done. Again, this was a retail client, but their challenges are the same as any other organization out there. This is an industry agnostic challenge that's seen across the board. This one specifically was for one of our retail clients, of course. So again, done on a big scale and a huge cost saving as a result of cleaning up their storage.
Okay, and then we'll jump back. Okay, so on our side, so we've got two specific scenarios that we wanted to chat about. So our scenario was a large international engineering organization, and they manage infrastructure projects across Africa and the Middle East. Those projects usually generate huge volumes of CAD files, drawing, video files, project documents, and technical records. And many of those records may need to remain available for decades. At the time, the environment contained more than 170 terabytes of content within the SharePoint environment, and a large portion of that was living in SharePoint additional storage already. The completed projects were effectively active within their environment. They did not have any closure process for the content, and the content simply couldn't be deleted because of contractual, regulatory, and long-term business requirements. So what we did for them is we assessed their content estate. We looked at the storage and the activity of the content from a backend, and then we defined a lifecycle treatment that they were going to continue using from that point on. With that, we identified an information structure that we identified the information that could have been moved out of the active storage while remaining accessible. And then we also introduced ongoing controls because we don't want them to run out of storage again in a couple of months and then they sit with the exact same problem. So the result of that was a 62 terabyte reduction in their active storage, and that represented about $152,000 in storage impact annually. So it's a significant reduction in their overall costs. To get that, we did use the tools that I mentioned to accomplish this, and we also used AvePoint Opus for the removal of the content and moving that into an archive space. The real outcome was establishing a defensible lifecycle for information that needed to remain accessible, and we also reduced the cost by helping them make better information decisions. Then the second scenario on our side was a legal industry. So different information, same lifecycle challenge. The environment contained matter-based information that had been migrated from an iManage onto 365. So what we're talking about is highly sensitive client information, privileged documents, correspondence, records, and information that may remain available long after the matter closes. And that's where data governance becomes absolutely critical. So for the law firm, we did not simply we had to evaluate all of the access to the SharePoint site. The organization needed to understand confidentiality, the privilege of the content that needs to be accessed, sensitivity, retention, ownership, and also the appropriate life cycle for that information. So sensitivity, classification, and labeling became particularly important alongside access control. The firm started to exceed their storage quota, and the more the users started adopting SharePoint as the document repository, it continued growing and it grew at a rapid pace. So in this scenario, this is where we had the duplicate information that was sitting on an external sharing portal, and versioning concerns as well as retention requirements meant that they couldn't simply delete the data. It had to be consolidated and brought back into the original locations before it can be removed from the external sharing portal. So our approach for them was, again, to assess their storage and their activity from a backend. We distinguished between active and closed matters and had rules against that to decide whether the content needs to be archived or whether it needs to be actively available. We identified the duplicate and inactive content, validated whether those items need to remain available, and then an archive approach was set up in order for us to move the content into a different storage location. But I mean, with all of these projects, I think the most important part is the fact that you need to do your change management alongside that, because it is going to be a minor impact on business. And that's what we also did with this client, where we specifically help them with their change management, prepared the users for what was coming with this change, but because the change management was done correctly, the impact was minimal. So the end result for this was a 22 terabyte reduction in their environment, which brought them within their storage quota, so they don't have a problem for the next couple of years. And what we did was we just separated their active collaboration content from the information that just needed to be obtained or kept securely, governed, and accessible for the long term. So yeah, thank you for listening to me babble the whole time about all of this information. I think this is the point where I'm going to hand back to Gethin so that we can close out.
Great stuff. Thank you, Roche. Thank you, James. It's great to finish, I think, with and go through some real examples. And when you see the savings and the immediate ROI like that on the screen, I think that's a pretty powerful message for justification and business case within an organization, really, to look at this. So big thank you to you both for your contribution today. It's been really informative to listen to. I guess over to me now to wrap it up a little bit. I always try and finish with some sort of key insights that we've picked up from the webinar throughout the hour. And I guess just to summarize, I would say that if you take 4 things away from today, then let it be these. First, keeping everything is still a decision. It's just an unmanaged one. So every piece of content deserves an outcome, like we mentioned, keep, archive, dispose, or remediate. Secondly, Copilot inherits the estate you already have. AI amplifies your content. It doesn't clean it. So every duplicate, every overshare file is a possible answer in front of the wrong person. Thirdly, storage cost is a symptom. It's not the problem. So buying more capacity is just a recurring bill for content. Nobody has made for content that nobody's made a decision about. So the savings come from, like we've discussed, life cycle, not capacity. And then fourth, readiness is a control, not a cleanup project. A one-off tidy up decays within months. It's ownership, closure, and retention that keep an estate AI ready. And if any of that sounds familiar, the easiest next step is to book a storage optimization assessment and see what your estate is really holding. And I suppose just a bit more detail, if you want to get in touch regards that assessment, this is where you can almost discover where you can reduce storage costs, improve efficiency, and optimize your storage strategy before committing to anything. Through one of these assessments, you can identify, like I mentioned before, an immediate ROI before we've started any kind of project. So it can be a great first step in starting this process. And it can be seen by 2 sides to it, really. One is you can look at it as storage optimization assessment, looking at high data growth, or 2 as an AI readiness assessment, looking at more the data quality and the risk associated with it. And you can see my contact details on the slide there to register your interest. And I'm sure we'll be following up from a Cloud Essentials perspective as well. We have got a couple of minutes. I haven't seen any questions come up from the audience. So maybe there is a couple of common ones just on those assessments. Maybe James or Roche could take this one. A couple of questions that I think are quite interesting. How long is a typical assessment, for example? James, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, sure. So a typical assessment could run for a few weeks typically. So we'll run that across your SharePoint environments, your Teams, OneDrive, and groups. But yeah, we can typically get that wrapped up within a few weeks, and then of course present the results back afterwards.
Perfect. And in terms of, I guess one question that the audience might be thinking about, in terms of that assessment, what scale have those assessments been done on before? What are we looking at? There's got to be some limitations, I suppose, to an assessment.
Yes. So in terms of the larger assessments that we've done, we've certainly done assessments into above a petabyte of data. So certainly this is built for scale. So yes, whether this is analyzing 50 or 100 terabytes, for example, or we have done it at scale as well. We've got examples, particularly in the case study which I mentioned as well. It was above 1 petabyte's worth of data that was analyzed and then also optimized as a result.
Nice. And then final one is some of the sources that supported, maybe just to highlight some of those.
So the sources we covered should also cover the destinations. Maybe might be an interesting one. So in terms of where data can be archived to, so it can be archived to our storage within AvePoint. We can leverage our own S3 or Azure Blob storage, for example, or you could use your own storage. So you could bring your own storage. It could be Amazon S3. It could be Dropbox. Could be FTP. Google Cloud Storage, for example, Azure Blob, it could be SFTP, or indeed we could trigger an archive to M365 archive as well, optionally.
Okay, perfect. With that, I think we're coming up for the hour. So big thanks again to Roche and James for their insight and contribution today. Thanks to you as the audience for sticking with us, and we'll catch up with you next time. Thanks very much.
Okay,
thanks everyone.